Vice President Joe Biden is a very close friend and ally of America's cities and towns. Many of us in this room today can testify to that. When the Vice President was in the Senate, he was instrumental in creating the COPS and Violence Against Women programs that help us do our jobs and keep our communities safe. Following the Great Recession, the Vice President served as a point of contact for mayors, regularly hosting teleconferences during the implementation of the Recovery Act. The Obama-Biden administration have supported the work we do every day to keep our communities strong. Cities have never had a stronger ally in the White House. In partnership with the White House, the National League of Cities is helping our local leaders promote small business, tackle climate change, eliminate childhood obesity, and promote safe neighborhoods. Joe Biden gets local government, and that's because he's one of us. The Vice President started his distinguished career in public service as a local official. In my personal experience, his warmth and humor always shines through. Mr. Vice President, thank you for your commitment to public service, and thank you for your commitment to America's cities. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow city officials, it is my great privilege to introduce the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so very, very much. It's a delight for me to be here today, and thank you for having me again. I'm always happy when I'm invited back again, so thank you very, very much. Mr. Mayor, you're an incredible guy. You've been an incredible mayor. I want to thank you for your leadership of Salt Lake City and for your leadership of this organization. And I mean that sincerely. Although we have none of that in common, there is one thing we do have in common. You and I share a distinction of both having married way up. Kate and Jill are better looking and smarter, and thank God we have them. You know, and I want to thank a very newly minute mayor, Megan Berry. Megan, I don't know where you are, but thank you for the passport to come into town. I'm looking forward to great, great things with you. It's, you all are elected officials. You understand we get invited to speak at a lot of venues. The ones you like the most are speaking to venues with the people you like the most, who you have the most in common with. I like mayors. I like city officials. And I'm not being solicitous. I mean that sincerely. I used to be my little state of Delaware, and several are here from Delaware. My little state of Delaware will tell you that we have 3 counties. One county has, by the way, there are 5 states smaller than us, so don't get too heady with me here. One state has, like a miniature Illinois, has 62% of the population. I got elected when I was a 27-year-old kid to the county council. It was an organization where the council person in those days had a district that was 7 times bigger than the state rep and 3 times bigger than the state senator. And I never intended on running for the county council. Too long a boring story to tell you how it happened. I ran being assured I couldn't win. You think I'm kidding? I'm not. Anyway, I won. And it turned out to be as difficult a job as I thought it would be. And that's the reason why I ran for the United States Senate 2 years later, because it was too damn hard, and they know where you live. So I just want to say I appreciate all of you. You know, the issues you deal with every single day, and this is not hyperbole, affect the quality of life of the American people almost more than anything that a state or federal government can do. Everything from sanitation and garbage collection, neighborhood safety, quality sidewalks, intersection crossings, roads, streets, stormwater runoff causing sewage overflow, public schools, and some of you, God love you as my mother would say, actually run jails, which I don't envy you for at all. The point is that all the while you're doing these things that people care about the most. By the way, raise your hands if any one of you have jurisdiction over zoning. Raise your hand. Oh, God bless you. If I never attend a zoning hearing again in my life, I will die a happy man. A happy man. I deal, as you know, the President has given me a significant amount of responsibility in foreign policy. I deal with war and peace all the time. It's easier than a zoning hearing. It's easier than a zoning hearing. The point I want to make is that you day to day deal with the things that occupy 80% of the concerns of the people you represent. And all the while you're doing that, the rest of America looks to you to generate the economic muscle that grows the United States of America. You are the source of the economic strength of America. And I'm here, I'm not trying to be nice, it's true. I'm here to thank you and to try to put all this in a slightly larger context. 6.5 years ago, our economy was in what I got criticized for saying initially, said Biden was exaggerating. I referred to it in the campaign as the Great Recession. And it was the Great Recession because of the worst recession America has ever endured, short of a depression. The worst downturn since the Great Depression. So when the President and I entered office, we knew we had to make some very tough and very unpopular decisions to get us back on track. The first was I suggested to the President we work on, and I didn't take a suggestion, he was already there, a Recovery Act. It ended up being over $800 billion that was spent in less than 18 months. As a consequence of that, I was on the phone, as the mayor can tell you, an average of 4 to 5 hours with over 165 mayors in America. All the governors but one in successive, detailed telephone conversations, making sure that the Recovery Act was implemented fairly, efficiently, and without waste. So the other reason I'm here is to say thank you to those of you who made it work. It's the largest spending program in the history of the United States of America in one shot, and it accounted for less than 0.3% of waste, fraud, or abuse. The reason I mention it is not me, it's you. You all know how to get things done. You know how to get things done. But it wasn't just the unpopular Recovery Act. We had to, we had the TARP program. Getting the Congress to vote for TARP is like getting them to vote to put rattlesnakes in everyone's home. We were bailing out the very people who caused the Great Recession, because had we not, every pension plan, every investment hard-working people have made would have gone up in smoke. I received a fair amount of criticism because I'm a union auto guy. We rescued the auto industry, being told at the time we could never sell more than 9 million vehicles a year. We lead the world once again and saved over 1 million jobs and generated over 600,000 new jobs. And then we had to convince the Congress to vote for Dodd-Frank, so to turn Wall Street from a casino back into what it was in the past and intended to be, a great allocator of capital, and the Affordable Care Act. So, folks, as a result, it's not a surprise we were incredibly unpopular. But the reason I mention these things is most of you stuck with us through that time, and it turned out to be right. Because of you and the grit of the American people, we've gone, as I said, from crisis to recovery to being on the cusp of resurgence. 13,200,000 private sector jobs, over 67 straight months of job growth. My prediction is there'll be close to 200,000 new jobs announced tomorrow. We're down to close to 5% unemployment from 10%. We have, in the process, cut the deficit by roughly 3/4 since we've come to office. And we're hearing about a word you'd never thought you'd hear. I never thought we'd hear 6 or 8 years ago. Insourcing instead of outsourcing. Your children are going to be raised with the ring of the word insourcing in their ears, not like the generation before of outsourcing. Businesses are coming back home. A.T. Kearney, which some of you may have employed as management firms, a worldwide organization, does a survey every year for the past 19 years, if my memory serves me correctly, and they asked the 300 largest industrialists in the world, where is the best place in the world to invest your money? This year, by a margin larger than any time the survey's been taken, in every single sector from IT to service, they said the United States of America. Secondly, there's an outfit called the Boston Consulting Group. They survey every American business invested in China. And they ask the same question every year. What are your plans for next year? This last survey, 54% said they plan on coming home. Now here's the reason I tell you this. That's not because of Barack Obama and Joe Biden. They're coming home because of our system. We have and will have the remainder of this century the cheapest energy in the world. North America is the epicenter of energy and will remain so. Not a joke, will remain so through the remainder of this century. It will not be the Arabian Peninsula, it's here. It costs 3 to 5 times cheaper. Natural gas is 3 to 5 times cheaper in the United States and 2 to 4 times cheaper in the United States than it is in Asia or Europe. That's why people are coming home to build factories here. We have the finest research universities in the world. None compare. We have the most agile venture capitalist system in the world. And we have a rule of law that protects intellectual property and a court system that fairly adjudicates contractual differences. That's why people are coming home. But to guarantee we take advantage of this resurgence and recreate real middle-class jobs, jobs people can live on. And let me explain what I mean by middle class. I have some very well-known economists who work for me. First time I used the phrase middle class, they said, well, that's $51,200 or $52,300. It's not a number. Middle class is a value system. It's about being able to own your own home and not just rent. It's about being in a position where you can send your kid to the local park and know they'll come home safely. It's about being able to send them to a local public school where if they do well, they can get to college, and if they get in, you can figure out how to pay to have them there. And it's about being able to take care of mom after dad passes away and hope your children never have to take care of you. That's what's built this country. That's why the wealthy got very wealthy, and that's why the poor have a way up. But to make this recovery a resurgence and permanent and meaningful, we have to do two things more. It's a lot more work to do. The first thing we have to do, and no one understands it better than you local officials, is we have to have the best educated and best trained workforce in the world. And the second thing we have to do, we have to have the most modern infrastructure in the world. Now, last year, at the previous State of the Union, the President asked me to lead an effort to identify what the jobs of the future will be and how we can provide for the opportunity for people willing to work to get those jobs so we can remain the most powerful economy in the world. And if they identify what is needed, so they can assure themselves that they have the ability to afford the training for the education that is needed to avail themselves of the jobs. It took me over 6 months engaging the entire cabinet. I traveled all across the country, meeting with hundreds of CEOs of the largest companies in the world, small businessmen and women, union leaders, workers, educators, and students. As a consequence of it, I filed a comprehensive study that contained over 50 actions we need to take so that those looking for work can find where the work is, identify the job, identify the skills that are needed to fill that job, and identify where they can go to get those skills to be able to have that job and afford to get them. We already knew that 12 years of education in the 21st century was not enough to continue to lead the world. For the next decade, every study shows, not just the one I did, 6 out of 10 jobs in the next 10 years require something beyond a high school diploma, from a 15-week certificate to a 2-year college degree to a 4-year degree to a PhD. For example, you see this in your own communities. We need 100,000 advanced manufacturing workers right now who don't need a degree, but who still need training of some kind. We need 1.3 million IT workers at the lowest level making $50,000 a year with just a 2-year degree. We need over 600,000 registered nurses, some of whom need associate's degrees or bachelor's degrees, making between $65,000 and $75,000 a year. To help folks get these skills and these jobs, we need to scale up what we know works. Everything from apprenticeships to partnerships between business and educators. We also learned that training and education range, as I said, between needing a certificate to a PhD. So we began by focusing on those jobs that exist today in America, going unfilled, that required less than a 4-year degree. I traveled from Rochester, New York, to these community colleges, to Des Moines, Iowa, to Renton, Washington, Miami, Florida, Manchester, New Hampshire, to see the collaboration going on between businesses and community colleges producing the work needed. We're up in northern Michigan. An outfit was building a solar factory. They had 1,000 jobs. But guess what? There were no workers who knew anything about photovoltaic technology. So we worked out a deal where they could bring into the community college the machinery from the floor. We got the company to map out the training needed, and in 16 weeks set up a conveyor belt from that community college to the factory. And by the way, I strongly encourage all of you who have not already engaged your business community and community colleges, if you haven't, look at them. There's great potential. My wife has a saying, she's a community college professor. She said the single best kept secret in the United States of America are community colleges. They can be of immense value to you, to your cities and your town. But after making this tour, we invested $8 billion in grants to community colleges to help provide this training, including $2 billion in competitive grants called TAC grants that many of you have applied for and gotten, to link local industries with community colleges to shape the workforce training programs. But in the process, we also learned one thing more. In order to remain the leader in the 21st century, as I said, 12 years of public education is not enough. It's what enabled us to lead the world in the 19th century because no other country had total full 12 years of free public education. But we know it's not enough. So earlier this year, the President and I, along with my wife Jill, traveled to, I always mispronounce it, Philosophy Community College outside of Knoxville, to announce our plan to make 2 years community college free for students who earn it, who qualify, and for community colleges who up their game by allowing their credits, getting their credits to be qualified to be able to transfer to the four-year university in that state. We made a basic value judgment. We think the American people make if they know about it. And that is how to pay for this. It's expensive. How do you pay for it without raising taxes or increasing the national deficit? We concluded the American people valued 9 million community college students being able to go to free community college rather than continuing to give $14 billion a year to so-called trust fund babies. They're good people, but they make up less than 1% of the population who are already very wealthy, by eliminating that, what they call stepped up basis. If you're fortunate enough to be able to go out and buy $1 million worth of stock, you keep it for 5 years, it's worth $5 million, you pay a capital gain on the difference between 1 and 5. But if before you die, your child, but if you don't sell before you die and your children inherit it, and they keep it for 5 years, it's now worth $10 million. They only pay the difference between 5 and 10, not 1 and 10. That costs the American taxpayers $14 billion a year. This is not about punishing anybody. It's about a value. Instead of not collecting that tax, I think even those who receive that benefit would understand that it's much more in the interest of the United States of America to have a better educated public, to increase productivity and growth in America, than it is to keep that going. The reason I bother to tell you this is there are a lot of ways to do the things we need by still cutting the deficit and not raising taxes. You get it. My wife has an expression that she's used for the past 20 years. She says, any country that out-educates us will out-compete us. That is a reality. So we're determined not to let that happen. Frankly, folks, I believe there should be 16 years of free public education in America. And we can afford that by limiting tax deductibility to 28%. No one punished, everyone does well, and every qualified student could attend a four-year university if they kept up their grades. But look, all of this basically is a topic for another speech, and I've just given you one. But the thing I most want to talk to you about is the second thing we have to do, and you deal with every day, is we have to focus on infrastructure in America. We have to have the best in the world if we expect these companies coming home to stay home. I remember when I was a local official, we tried to attract people to our county. What do they want to ask you? Is there a railhead I can connect to? What access to the highway do I have? Do I have sufficient water to run my operation? What's the sewer system like? Tell me what the school system's like, and they go down the list, right? Even if you offer them free land or significant tax breaks, if you don't have the infrastructure, they don't come. So, we don't have the infrastructure. Some of you may remember I got in a little bit of trouble when I landed on LaGuardia Airport, and I said, if in fact you were blindfolded, I took you to the Beijing Airport and LaGuardia Airport in the middle of the night where you couldn't hear the language being spoken, and said, which is the developing country? You'd say LaGuardia. Everyone was outraged, except the mayor, the governor, the workers at LaGuardia, and guess what? Mayor Cuomo was investing over $4 billion in changing the train. How can, excuse me for saying this, the greatest city in the world, how can it be and have a second-class infrastructure? You know what we rank now in transportation in the world? 28th. 27 countries in the world are deemed to have a better infrastructure than we have. The American Society of Engineers says we need to spend $3.6 trillion in additional infrastructure, and we'll never do it, to be invested by 2020 to deal with the decaying, dilapidated infrastructure we have, from bridges to roads to airports to ports, etc. Today, for example, I took a group of Republican and Democratic mayors, governors, and senators down to the Panama Canal a year ago to see the eighth wonder of the world. They're building two new transit spots through the canal. They are gigantic. They're going to accommodate ships that are 100 feet longer, carry twice as much cargo, by the way, 80 feet longer than the longest aircraft carrier, carry 50% more cargo, 100% more cargo at 50% the cost, because it doesn't take much to propel a ship once it's in movement across the water. Do you realize the United States of America, on the East Coast, as you're coming through the canal, there are only 2 ports all the way from Corpus Christi to Boston who can accommodate these ships? Baltimore and Norfolk. They're the only 2 that can accommodate these huge post-Panamax ships. What are we doing? They can easily continue to float right across the ocean, down the coast of South America. They're jobs. Ladies and gentlemen, we find ourselves in a position today where we are, as my mother used to say, biting our nose off to spite our face. We're in a situation where companies aren't going to relocate, And by the way, we find that we need access to not only roads and ports and airports. We used to talk about suburban sprawl back in the days when I was a county councilman. There was a program that Alan Funt ran called Candid Camera. And in 1970, when I was a councilman, the fastest growing county in America was my county, Newcastle County. And Alan Funt, on the road that connects, it's called the Concord Pike, connects Pennsylvania and Delaware, one of the roads, a 4-lane access road with a big divided green in the middle. He put up a big sign saying, "Delaware closed today." And people stopped their cars and turned around. He said, "Delaware closed today, overcrowding." Well, guess what? Most of us at a federal level don't realize what you understand at a local level. Your problem isn't urban sprawl, it's job sprawl. Job sprawl. A term that's been coined by several professors at some of our great universities. Now the jobs are somewhere between 3 and 10 miles from the center of your cities. Those threshold jobs, the jobs in the cities in the high-rise buildings, are the jobs of the people who are already middle class, by and large, who have degrees, and who are, well, there are not as many of them. So what's happened? What's happened now is no city or town can grow where residents can't find work. And that's what's happening in big cities like Detroit, Chicago, Atlanta, and maybe the cities you represent. It's happening in smaller cities like Youngstown, my hometown of Scranton. Studies confirm what you already know. People can't move up the ladder to the middle class unless they have access to reliable transportation just to get the job interview, to be able to show up at work on time, to get home to their families in time for dinner and put their kids to bed. And in most cities, the majority of residents do not have private transportation. You've worked with Transportation Secretary Anthony Fox to determine what you need and what you want and how he works with you when we had this program called Tiger Grants. The one thing I was telling the mayor of this great city on the way in from the airport, she was gracious enough to meet me at the airport, was the biggest problem I have with what happens in cities and towns is you almost always have to go through your state legislative bodies to get any help. By the way, when I was in the Senate a long time. When I got there, there was a thing called the LEAA, the Law Enforcement Assistance Act. But it had to go through the governor of every state and then the legislature. And it got divided up. If you had 40 state reps, it got divided up in 40 places. It didn't go to high crime areas. So when I wrote the crime bill, if you notice, any of you applying for cops from the cops office, you don't have to go through anybody. You go directly to go. Well, that's what we did with these Tiger Grants in the Recovery Act. And in the Recovery Act, we invested $4 billion in these acts. And as predicted by mayors, guess what? It brought $14 billion in private investment off the sidelines to deal with specific projects that you needed to make your cities and towns grow. Last week, we announced a $500 million in new Tiger Grants, including $200 million to Jefferson City, Alabama, for bus rapid transit line to connect 20 largely low-income communities where 1/5 of the people don't have access to vehicles to the areas where the jobs are. It's going to help 50,000 people get to their jobs in and around Birmingham. I've seen the same story in communities all across the country. The point is that we know the thing you need the most from Washington is certainty in the investment we say we're going to make and some help. And the president, I get that. But it's all about prioritizing. Our budget, the Obama-Biden budget that we sent to Congress 6 months ago, is a multi-year plan for a 40% increase in infrastructure funding. It's worth over $483 billion over 6 years that would all go to infrastructure. And it's paid for by bringing home over $1 trillion of money parked overseas that companies aren't coming home to avoid taxes. So we lower the tax rate to come in as long as it goes to providing for infrastructure. But Congress has continued to do what it's done the last 25 times. That is, it's kicked the can down the road. The bill that passed the House today, the Highway Transportation Bill, is basically a 3-year patch. It doesn't give enough funding or enough certainty. And it doesn't fund Tiger Grants and the other programs that you at a local level need to control and make your own decisions about the improvements you need. We have to keep pushing for more. Because as I said, the second thing we need for a resurgence is a real live infrastructure that is 21st century. And I know all of you need improvements on more than just your transportation infrastructure. We need major improvements on water infrastructure. One of the hardest things to deal with as a local official are these issues because people don't see them. And so if you spend $3 million on water infrastructure and you don't build the park or clean up the park, it's hard to explain why you spent this something they can't see. This is a big problem because a lot of our water infrastructure is not from this era. For example, just give you a few examples. In South Dakota, Washington State, Pennsylvania, Alaska, they have wooden water pipes from the 19th century. And every day in America, while places like California are being parched and others, we in America lose 1/5 of our piped water to leaks. 7 billion gallons of treated water each day are lost. Since 2009, the USDA has invested more than $10 billion in water projects that affect more than 15 million Americans in rural areas. But the money's run out. Another area we need to keep focusing on is modernizing our energy infrastructure. This is important in every city, town, county in the country. And it's going to even be more important as we go forward. Right now, for example, we have 2.6 million miles of gas distribution pipeline. I won't bore you with too many facts, just that one. Those distribution pipelines that carry gas all over America, 2.6 million miles of underground in this city and every city in America, they are prone to, over 9% of it are prone to leaks. These were, in fact, built in 1950 and 1960s, and 9% are leaking now. They're unsafe, they need replacement, but the replacement cost for just the gas pipeline is $270 billion. $270 billion. Between 2003 and 2012, there were 679 major power outages in America. Depending on where you live, they were from hurricanes to superstorms to tornadoes. And the cost to the U.S. economy each year has been between 18 low and $33 billion. Overall, we need to spend $2.1 trillion in the next 30 years to modernize our grid. And by the way, those of you who live on the coast, most of the generating power is at sea level. Most of it is on the coast where you live. All of it's susceptible, like what happened in Superstorm Sandy when Con Ed went out in New York City. The Recovery Act invested $90 billion in clean energy, the most we've ever done in our entire history, and $4.5 billion investment in technical assistance for energy infrastructure upgrades. But earlier this year, Secretary of Energy Ernie Moniz and I went to Philadelphia to release what we call the Quadrennial Energy Review, Energy Transmission, Storage, and Distribution Infrastructure. Really wonky stuff, right? I'm leaving a copy, and I can tell you, you can each call and get a copy. And the way you do that is that we find that that infrastructure that needs to be repaired, many of you don't even know how bad off it is where you are. You can check it online at energy.gov. I recommend that we accelerate the adoption of these new technologies like smart meters. It recommends, I should say, like smart meters to help utility companies respond faster and more efficiently to power outages after extreme weather. How many of you had suffered through power outages in the last 3 years? Raise your hand. In many cases, it took a long time to get it back online, didn't it? Well, maybe some of you it wasn't, but a lot of you were. Because what happens is the switching stations, the transmission lines, the connectors, it's complicated stuff. Because look, here's the deal. Our energy infrastructure is vulnerable, not just because of its age and its complexity, but because of the most consequential issue of our time, climate change. Now, how many of you out there believe there's no such thing as gravity? Okay, then we understand one another. Look, you guys get it. Climate change is not just an environmental issue, it's a moral issue, it's a public health issue, it's a public safety issue, it's a national security issue, it's an economic issue. And it's an issue where reality has intruded. Back in 1986, I introduced in the United States Senate the first climate change bill that was ever introduced in the Senate. And it was called the Global Climate Protection Act. The only reason I raise it is I used a phrase in there that everybody kidded me about. I said, folks, in public policy, reality has a way of intruding. Well, folks, reality has intruded. 19 of the hottest years occurred in the last 2 decades. 19 of the hottest years on record. Last year was the hottest year on record around the world, not just here. And we're on track to break that record this year. We've seen firsthand severe storms, flooding, wildfires that cripple infrastructure where your residents live and need and businesses depend upon. And it's not a question of if, but the question now is when. When will we see more superstorms like Sandy? Look what the El Nino is doing, and it's just getting started in the Pacific. In my home state of Delaware, when I was a local official, because we're used to hurricanes as natural disasters along the Atlantic coast, there was a standard when there was declared a national disaster because of weather. We will build back to where we were before the storm. All of you know that standard doesn't apply anymore. We have to build to a new, fundamentally higher standard. You can't build back southern Manhattan to the state it was before the superstorm. Now there is a large seawall because everybody knows more is coming. I could go all across America in your own communities. So we have a choice. The choice is fairly basic. And that is, as my friend, the President's National Science Advisor, John Holdren, puts it, Dr. Holdren, we can mitigate, we can adapt, or for lack of mitigation and adaptation, we can suffer. And the administration's climate action plan is the most forward-looking, ambitious plan in our history, and it includes a toolkit with more than 200 resources that cities and local leaders can use to identify vulnerabilities, estimate how much it will cost to fix, and get in touch with federal agencies and experts to see what funds may be available. If you haven't already looked, I urge you to use it. It's toolkit.climate.gov. And cities large and small are where the hard work happens in this fight. I'll conclude by pointing out last month, I keynoted a U.S.-China Climate Leaders Summit in California with my good friend Mayor Garcetti, which brought together cities, states, and provinces, their leaders from both countries, to build upon partnerships around the world. For example, 3 of the cities represented by China emit more into the air than the entire country of Japan or the entire country of Australia. Los Angeles and Beijing now are working together on low-carbon urban planning, research projects, technology exchanges, not just so people in Beijing can take off masks to be able to walk the street, but because it also means the opportunity. In every difficulty, there's gigantic opportunity. This will generate thousands upon thousands of good paying middle-class jobs. Good paying. My friend and your former colleague, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, is leading a compact of mayor which relies on and rallies city officials all over the world to pledge to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, build climate-resilient cities, and protect the public health. Last month, there were only 46 American cities who had signed the compact. Today, we've reached 83 cities have signed. And I know there are several mayors in here who have signed that compact, from Boulder to Minneapolis to Memphis. But I encourage all of you to take a look. Join it. There's no reason why we can't get 100 more cities to join it. It matters. It's consequential. And by the way, it's not all about what we can't do and cut back on. It's about the jobs that can be created. You need people to build solar grids, just like you need people to dig for coal. There are great jobs available. And ladies and gentlemen, we're on the path now to going forward for the Paris Climate Change Initiative, which is going to be a big deal. So look, just trying to imagine a kind of world that we are able to leave our children if we begin to act now. Imagine the jobs that will be created just on the energy sector improvements on infrastructure. It is estimated that it will generate 1.5 million middle-class jobs by the year 2030, just getting it underway. I've said time and again, our strength as a country lies not just in the example of our power, but the power of our example. And because of the research investment money we put together in the last 7 years, now solar energy per kilowatt burn is almost as cheap as coal, and wind is as cheap as coal. There's so much we can do. But the good and bad news is it all starts with you locally elected officials in the cities and towns. So let me close where I began. Thank you for what you do. You literally have the hardest jobs in government, but you're the only people, primarily the only people, who make things happen. You did not run for office for self-aggrandizement. You are true public servants. And city by city, town by town, you're leading the way for the entire United States of America. And we want to, as long as we're in office, be your partners. Stand side by side. Jerry Aberson, lieutenant governor of a state in an adjacent state, who was mayor of Louisville for 25 years, is the White House's top guy in the White House, working in these issues. For 25 years, Jerry's dealt with the problems you've dealt with as a mayor. So I encourage you to call me, call Jerry, work with our office. I mean this sincerely. Those of you who work with me know I mean what I'm saying. Folks, we've come so far in this country in the last 7 years, and I've been doing this since I was a 29-year-old kid. But I can honestly say, if some of the folks would just get out of our way, not ours, not Democrat, Republican. Some people just get out of the way. There used to be a woman named Emmylou Harris in the Civil Rights Movement when I came up. She had an expression, she'd say, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." Well, I'm sick and tired of hearing from Democrats and Republicans what awful trouble we're in. My God, what's going to happen? I've been doing this my whole adult life. I have never been more optimistic about the possibilities of this nation than I am today. There's so much we can do, but we need you. So let's make it happen. You make it happen. Force us to act. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you. Thanks, folks. Thanks.